And a very good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101. Some technical glitches there at the beginning, but welcome. It's a Tuesday evening, our first program of the week. Remember, we are on now 4 days per week, um, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We had our inaugural program on Friday night, Black Matters. On that program, we dealt strictly with issues that had to do and have to do with African Guyanese. Black Matters debut on Friday night, and we had a full house, and we are going to be on every Friday. That's the Friday edition of Politics 101. And on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we have our regular politics across the board. Good evening and welcome. Welcome to Politics 101. Those of you who are joining us from Guyana, very good evening to you. Hope you had a wonderful weekend and the new week has started with a bang. If you join us from the wider Caribbean, as usual, good evening to you. Same time as in Guyana. Those of you who are joining us from Suriname, French Guyana, Venezuela, Brazil, welcome to Politics 101. And those of you who are coming at us from North America, Canada, the United States, welcome. Good to the people who are joining us from Maryland, Washington, D.C., location I know quite well. Good evening, Brooklyn Heights, New Jersey, Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut. I've seen a few people from there. Welcome to Politics 101. And we can't forget our sisters who are joining us from Europe, in particular, England, United Kingdom, Great Britain, however you choose to describe the former colonial mother country. Good evening to you. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. Tonight we're going to be touching a few issues with GHK Lall, who of course needs no introduction to you. He is a regular on this program, has been off for a couple of weeks, but is back on this evening. And those of you who read would know that he writes, and touches all issues. We have made use of some of his letters and columns while he was away, but he's back. Good evening, and welcome to Politics 101. The chickens have come home to roost. Chickens have come home to roost. We had Buxton, and then over the weekend, we had Hopetown. And I'm sure you followed what happened in Hopetown. The chickens have come home to roost. The chickens have come home to roost. As we said, what happened in Buxton was not an ordinary protest by the people of Buxton. It was a confrontation between law enforcement, Ala Kanu, and PPP's friends in the village. And we saw the police act differently. And then we, as if that's not enough, we saw what happened at Hopetown. Young man allegedly hit down pedestrians. The village turned on him, or, well, not the village, some people in the village turned on him. His father allegedly intervened and tried to circumvent the police. These are, I'm reading this stuff in the press. So if Buxton was about PPP's friends flexing their muscles to say to the PPP, wait a minute, this is not the deal we made. And eventually, a community leader called off the Buxton thing, never to be heard about after. And then at Hopetown, West Coast Bobbies, the place where those young men were brutally murdered, and the people came onto the streets in righteous indignation, the Henry boys, the son of a rich man, apparently, allegedly, pedestrians, and some people in the community turned on him, and it is understood that they beat him, allegedly. And then his well-to-do daddy, with connections to the PP, allegedly sought to take him home rather than to the police station to be interviewed about the accident. Big people in high places circumventing the law, the police in Buxton, in Hopetown. What are we seeing in our Guyana? Are the chickens coming home to roost? What you sow, you shall reap. If you govern by privilege for some, and some or the other, that privilege for some is being threatened, what happens? Professor Thomas talked about the criminalized state. Are we back? Let me talk about the criminalized state. We talk about the merging of the government and state. With elements in the underworld or the overworld. What are we seeing in Guyana? They tried to pass the Buxton thing off as a village protest. Didn't get very far. I wonder what they will say about what happened at Hopetown. You see, when dog licorice, he bound to choke. The PPP has begun to choke. All powerful, Scraven, licorice. And when you licorice and Scraven and you hongish, all these terms we use for people who are greedy with power. What happens is that you begin to choke. What you sow, you shall reap. Welcome to Politics 101. The chickens are coming home to roost. Is that a question? Is it a rhetorical question? The chickens are coming home to roost. Ipadaji just announced that they're seeking a meeting with the Attorney General. They're still not releasing that subvention to Ipadaji. I said last week that you can wine and dine with Letitia right. You can hold her up as a symbol of what Guyana should be. You can give her honorary doctorates. You can do all those things to that individual woman. But just before she came, and just after she leaves, the police will kneel on the back of a young woman just like her. You can wine and dine her, but you demolish the homes of people living like her. You can wine and dine Letitia Wright, but you take a small subvention away from an organization that want to create more Letitia Wrights. And then, of course, the budget. It has gone quietly into the night for some. But the budget is like a weapon. It's like a weapon of mass destruction in Guyana. Therein lies a weapon of social, racial, and gender inequality. Pregnant. Martin Carter talked about the sharp knife of dawn, grippers in my hand. But how bare is everything? Tall trees, the infinite world. Very perceptive poet. Tall trees. How bare is everything? A big budget. $700 billion. He talked about the knife of dawn. In that budget is a knife of social inequality. With the poor, racial inequality, with Africans and Amerindians, with poor women having to leave their homes at nights to go and watch over the rich and powerful. Some of them are spat in the face by the people who they guard at nights. I was reminded that George Lamin talked about sugar workers dirtying their hands. Our Indian Guyanese brothers and sisters dirtying their hands to feed the Caribbean. I was reminded of that. And I was reminded so that the point could be made that some of our darker brothers and sisters didn't dirty their hands or don't like to dirty their hands. Never mind, they dirty their hands. Long before indentured, our brothers and sisters came here as indentured. They continue to dirty their hands. The women, mostly Black women, midwives, who bring our children into of the world, dirtying their hands. All of us dirty our hands. Welcome to Politics 101. We're going to be talking tonight about those issues. We're going to be opening it up and getting beneath the surface. Wonderful, wonderful calypso by the Mystic Prowler, winning the Calypso Monarch in Trinidad and Tobago in 1998, Below the Surface. Below the Surface. We're going to get below the surface tonight with GHK Lall. Are you ready? And I am sure Some of you are ready. All of you are ready. Good evening. Uh, Good evening, brother Gabriel.
Good evening to you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you and to all our Guyanese brothers and sisters, wherever they may be. It's good to be back sharing with you.
Thank you very much. And let's go straight into the budget. You've written quite a few pieces on the budget. You have tackled some of the hard questions. You were the first person I remember, because we used your column, who made the point. And I remember it. You said only 1.7% of a $780 billion budget was set aside for what Clive Thomas called the poor and the powerless. I want you to start there.
We've got a budget of $786 plus billion, almost 4 billion US dollars. Record breaking from last year, which was a record breaker in itself. We know what is happening across the world with global supply chain. We are aware of inflationary pressures, some from the Ukraine, some from the COVID, which is receding and not receding, from ships and tankers lined up and ports clogged. And we know what it is for our fellow Guyanese at the bottom of the economic ladder. We may have friends who are impacted negatively. We are sure to have family, relatives here in Guyana who are feeling the brunt of rising cost of living. A cost of living, price pressures that keep racing away from them. They are falling farther and farther behind. So we have this budget. I understand, and it was made public, that the Private Sector Commission made recommendations. We can interpret that however we want, demands, and certainly the Private Sector Commission and the private sector in broader terms have to be extremely pleased, and they have gone public with that too. They are pleased with the provisions in the budget that are there for infrastructure. Hundreds of billions in different ways, education, health, security, and so on and so forth. Where is the money? 10% of that budget, 10% of that $786 billion. I ask the budget preparers, who are really the people who have the input, but the decision makers, the brain trust, where is your care and compassion and consideration for the poor in Guyana, especially those who are on the margins, particularly the African Guyanese community? They are Indians and they are Amerindians who are also feeling the squeeze. What about them? We couldn't set aside 10% of $786 billion for our brothers and sisters at the bottom of the economic ladder, struggling and agonizing from day to day, not to get brandy, not to get grapes, not to get salmon, but to get some bora and some callaloo and some sweet potato and the basics of a meal. And the basics of a meal. The World Bank sounded the warning before. The IDB wrote their report. And it's 48% and upwards of 40% of Guyana not having enough for a meal, a proper meal when the day comes. 48% on the poverty line, or somewhere living on five US dollars a day. That's $1,000 a day. What can $1,000 a day buy? When provisions, sweet potato is two, three, $400 a pound. Tomatoes are $600-700 on a given week. And we could go on and on with that. Budget billions, infrastructure billions. You know what that means, my brothers and sisters. Whether you're a PPP supporter or a PNC or black or Indian or Amerindian, do you know what that means? Budgets and infrastructure billions. It means that when Lilawati and Mary and Tashana stand up and Rose stand up and see those roads passing by and the bridges being built, if they are built and how they are built, and the potholes are being filled when they are filled, are saying, well, what about me? What is in there for me? What is in that budget that is making a difference in my life when I stare at my children, when I look at my table, and before that, when I peer into my pot? When I peer into my pot, which is empty. And this is day after day. Yes, the government has come forward and said, oh, we've done this with the GPL and the GWI and subsidies and fuel. And let's be frank, those have got their value. We are doing this with the children. But instead, I say, instead of running it through the Ministry of Education and open the door for corruption, which we know is going to be ever prevalent, run it through the tax system, a tax credit. But let's look at this in a more granular way. We take 607 million dollars out of the oil fund last year. We're taking some more money this year. Could we set aside 10%, a measly 10% of the oil money for direct benefits to the Guyanese poor? All the Guyanese poor, the public servants, the police, the discipline services, the fire people. But I think I'm being redundant here, so excuse me. So that they can feel that yes, we have oil and we are tasting the oil in the budget dollars that have been set aside for us. When people can't buy food on a daily basis, when they are falling behind, then do we have oil? Are we the fastest growing economy in the world per capita? What does the biggest GDP or the most explosive GDP means when the average GDP is about 3% and we are at 62% last year? What does that mean? What does that translate to when I look at my children? When I look at these numbers coming up, yes, there's an increase in the tax threshold. But what about more? We can't get all one time. We are not greedy people. I come from a poor background, but I'm not poor in spirit. So I know I can identify with the underdogs because I've been treated like a dog myself. That's why I can speak to these issues. I have not forgotten my roots, my sisters and brothers, my fellow Guyanese. You bring a budget out for $786 billion, and this is what we get. The people most talked about in the world, the country that is in everybody's lips, and with a government that says, and people in the media, learned men, saying, defending what was done. Infrastructure is preparation for the future. Indeed, it is when we can get 60 to 70 cents on the dollar. You can decide for yourself what I'm leaving 30 cents on the dollar for. And it's not for good things. If we can get that. In the meantime, whilst we have infrastructure, as I wrote somewhere, we cannot afford to have, we cannot be proud of all these indigents in Guyanese society. Our budget had to mean more for the poor, and it had to mean more for the poor now. It had to mean more for the marginalized communities. It had to mean more for the people who feel left out and are left out. And it has not done so. It has not addressed so. The president, the vice president, the minister of finance, all honorable men, I'm sure, can talk leaf or license or whatever we call it. But at the end of the day, those people are still without. Too many Guyanese are still without in an economy, in a country that is the talk of the world, that is the glitter in the eye of a lot of people. So everybody's coming here and getting a piece of the action. The 1% people, the less than 1% people in society must be smiling already, can't stop smiling because of all the provisions in the budget via contracts, via what is going to come down the line for the rest of the year, what is waiting there for them. They don't even have to get budget supplements this year, but they will get. So the rich gets more. This is what GDP means. The rich gets more and the poor gets less. The wealth gap widens. We don't want to go into inflation. That's a different conversation. But at the end of the day, people, we're talking about inflation whilst we have starvation. We have starvation, and that just should not be. We're not talking about the textbooks here, but I got to tell you this. If we've got the biggest GDP anywhere in the planet, or one of the biggest ones, and we have 95% of that GDP growth going to 5% of the population, then the other 95 that it will are forced to scramble over the 5% that is left. And that is what our budget, our growth, our economy means for Guyanese, the mass of Guyanese, the multitude of Guyanese who are left to scramble on their own.
The words there and the wisdom of GHK Lall, talking about the budget, putting it in context, witnessing for the poor, the powerless, asking what's in that budget to make them happy. I refer to Martin Carter's poem just now. He said, "How bare is everything? Tall trees, infinite air, the unrelaxing tension of the world. The unrelaxing tension of the world. How bare is everything?" But that bareness is against the backdrop of plenty, relative plenty. What we are getting is plenty for us. It may not be plenty for America and all those places, but for Guyana, what we are getting is plenty, relatively speaking. And there is the issue that we deserve more as a country. Bad contract, big company taking advantage of us. But there's the other issue, the little that we are getting from Exxon and others. How are we distributing it? And GHK Lall has just laid it out for us. Not even 10%. If you're taking 10% of 782 billion, it will be 78. It will come up to 78 billion, 10%. And if you took that 78 billion and invest it in the poor in a direct way. My brother said just now about the roads. One old lady in my village pulled me aside when we raised the issue of cash transfers for poor people. And the government resisted it at the time. She pulled me aside. She said, "David, you must talk about build road for we. Road for motor car. Road for motor car, not for human beings." The perception of our people, it is not that they will not benefit from the roads, as Brother Gabriel has pointed out, but what are you giving them directly to make them happy? Human beings ultimately want to be happy. And to be happy means to be housed and to be fed and to be clothed and to be able to watch your children smile and beam as they get what others got. Dr. King talked about nutrition for the body as a very important component of human dignity. So there's nothing in the budget for poor people. Nothing in the budget, nothing to talk about. And we shall see in the coming year, they will spend that money. And that money has to end up somewhere, 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 not in the pockets of the public servants, not in the pockets of the poor. Where is it ending up? GHK, any last thing you want to say on the budget before we move to the next topic?
Well, I heard you say in your introductory remarks that the budget has been weaponized. And in my mind, there is no question that it has been weaponized and is being used very skillfully, and I think not even subtly anymore. The argument is silky, but the clearly the numbers are a steel rod to the head of the poor, and saying, well, this is what it's going to be, this is what we have decided, and you just got to live with it. How people are living in this country, I really don't know. The minimum wage people, the cooks, the domestics, the police, the public servants, especially the middle to lower level ones, the a number of people across the board. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of people here. And how they are managing to survive in this abundant economy with such a paltry share of it, it's still beyond me. I really don't have the answers to that. And when people talk about, we can beat this one to death. When we talk about infrastructure, infrastructure is a good thing. I want infrastructure, but whilst I want and you want infrastructure, in the meantime, we must be able to have that health. We must be able to have the bodily wherewithal to participate in the benefits of that infrastructure. If we don't have that, then we are a derelict in physical infrastructure by ourselves. We are in need of an injection of funds. We are in need of an injection of life-saving oxygen. We are in need of an injection of life-saving vitamins and medicines and maybe even blood. And we're not getting it. But yet we are making speeches. The president is making speeches on Al Jazeera. He's going to foreign locales and pontificating. Let them come to Guyana. Let them drive through Temeri to Georgetown. And don't go by helicopter and bypass the city of Albistown and Agricola and Tiger Bay and all those other depressed communities, maybe Caneville along the way, and say, how are you managing? Starbrook News has an article, a weekly spread. I think it's on the middle pages, and it's a pretty good one. It's in part 12. So you've got 12 where they talk about 10 Guyanese.
Yes,
The high cost of living. We are talking about bread and butter here. We're not even talking about bread and butter. Leave out the butter. The butter is a luxury. We're talking about bread and roti and transportation and medicines that the Georgetown Hospital doesn't have, despite us spending hundreds of millions of dollars, US dollars. Where is the money going to come for people to have the essentials, the fundamentals of living? If I am the president, if I'm a leader here, I'm going to be ashamed of myself to open my mouth, given where our people are. Not one Guyanese should be left behind, and we should be serious about it. And instead of making speeches and putting our attack dogs to attack those who dare to speak and say, this just should not be in this time and this age and with this kind of economy and with this kind of treasure, then we are our worst enemies. And the budget, instead of being something highly anticipated, becomes something that is to be highly dreaded. And with that, we are living.
To be highly dreaded. GHK Lall is here with us tonight. I want to thank all of you for coming down to Politics 101. I heard one of the critics of this program and other program in the process of cursing out his former boss, making reference to Sherrod Duncan's program and David Hines' program as being a program with high numbers. I heard the same person a few weeks ago say they don't have numbers. But in trying to parse out his former boss, he admits that politics 101 and in the ring and straight up by Mark Bishop that we have numbers. We have people who come on here every night. Not to have red meat thrown at them, but to participate in discussions and analysis of their own condition. Introduced the term last week, equality of condition, because we talk about equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. The assumption is that if you have equality of opportunity, then you're more likely to have equality of outcome. And the argument is that there are opportunities in Guyana. And I said, well, hold on, if you don't have equality of condition, then equality of opportunity doesn't make sense. What is the condition of the Amerindian Guyanese? What is the condition of African Guyanese? What is the condition of poor Indians, East Indian Guyanese? It is the condition that will determine whether you start in the race. If your legs are not strong, if your bodies are not well fed, how can you start the race? Equality of condition determines whether there's equality of opportunity. I want to thank you all so much for coming on, and thanks for those who have been sending me inboxes in Facebook, and I don't get to them until like a week later. You can imagine the volume of mails that I have to deal with, and I don't have an assistant, so I have to go through them myself. So I want to apologize sometimes for getting to your messages a little bit later than normal, but keep sending them, because without your encouragement, these shows are not. They are not going to be successful or continue to be successful. GHK Buxton again. I say Buxton again because there is something about that village that seems to attract a certain kind of action. There seems to be a romance between Buxton and these PPP governments when they're in power. What do you make of what transpired in Buxton last week?
Well, what we're seeing here is a replay of what occurred a while back. When governments, and the PPP government has compiled an incomparable record of creating parallel institutions and enforcers and agents outside of existing state institutions, you end up with what you have in Buxton last week. When you go outside of what has been established for nefarious purposes, you end up with a repeat of what you had after the jailbreak and what terrorized Guyanese, and from which it seems that there is no learning. Look, we can call it community outreach, we can call it rehabilitation, which the government has been doing. We can use ministers to go and share out budget monies under his ministry, monies that are better utilized by engaging the opposition, by targeting the poor. But instead of doing that, you go and create these parallel forces from the Twilight Zone, who having tasted that nearness to what is powerful, become a power unto themselves. And this is what we had at play in Buxton. Yes, a village with a long tradition, a long and storied tradition of resistance, a terrible word in this country, a word that is being trampled upon, that it must have no life in it. But once there is breath, there is life. And once there is one person willing to stir the pot, there is going to be people who are going to be talking, people who are going to be objecting, people who are going to speak their consciences, or people who are going to take to the streets on some issue that is dear to them. What is so? On the one hand, in the first instance, we have a Buxton development where a friend of the government, an ally of the government, decided, well, wait a minute, what you're doing there doesn't apply to me. Or I want a level playing field with your guys of your color, your stripe, who are being given a pass. So why am I being targeted when I'm supposed to be a friend of yours? That's one thing. The other thing I noticed coming out of Buxton was that was that the following day I was bracing myself when I looked at the two newspapers that I read, Stabrook and Kaichur, and there was not a single peep from any of the usual PPP commentators to say, well, look at them. They're there at it again. It was as if somebody turned off a switch. When I think of Monrepo, when I think of Cotton Tree, I felt that the switch was turned off, and I said to myself, why is this so? Where did the wisdom come from? Because the commentators recognize that even that this one in particular, this time in Buxton, you couldn't pass it on to the PNC or to legitimate black protesters or objectors. And they were sensible enough or pulled in enough and to say, hey, don't go near to the one. Let a one die on its own feet and let it get out of the limelight quickly. But the, so that alone tells you that this was a family secret that was necessary to be kept undercover. Let it go its way. We're gonna work our magic behind and start this thing out. So let's make sure that But here's this: the damage has been done in Buxton, one to the community and two to the wider nation. So where are the conscientious Guyanese? Where are the clear-headed, clear-thinking, conscientious Indian Guyanese? Because what we are having here, and I've used for the third time in this part of the program, what we're having here is a replay of what happened before when we had what were loudly hailed as crime fighters. We had crime fighters in the police force having their own police action under the umbrella of national security, only for it to turn out that they were anything but law-abiding people protecting the citizens of this country, and they were pursuing their own interests, knowing that they have secrets for the government, a PPP government, and knowing that what they do, they can't be touched until it's too late or it's too far gone. And so once again, I would have thought that the PPP would have learned, because it's still got some of those old heads from prior administrations. So I'd have thought that it would have learned something and said, well, look, we ain't going down the road again. We are going to deal with this on the straight and narrow. We're going to deal with this with what we have in the police force. We have clearly all the commanders and their assets in the police. We are going to deal with this on a legitimate basis. But when you go around and you come up with these concoctions under community cover and under selective cover, you get a blow up as did in Buxton. Now, there's another thing going on here. Excuse me. My sources are telling me, and I suspect, because I know how they operate, that the U.S. Embassy has been funneling intelligence to Kanu So I don't think it has to do with marijuana. They don't care about weed and smokes, and I wouldn't know weed or marijuana if I see it. But they have been following Kanu with intelligence that it has no choice but to go on those drug busts that we have been reading about. Where this one came from, where this particular so-called police meet slash Kanu action came from, is anybody's guess. I don't think the U.S. people had any hand in this. $7 million of marijuana, who cares? At least not from their perspective. But somebody cared, and somebody kicked up a stink about it, and that person is recognized as being within PPP circles, and now they've got to live with that fallout. That is why they want this matter to go away. That is why they don't want anybody to talk about it. That is why they don't want any spotlight to be shed upon it.
GHK Lall giving us a steak on Buxton. As I said, the chickens will come home to roost. You reap what you sow. You don't want to deal with legitimate leaders in the African Guyanese communities. You want to deal with them in a certain way. And you make deals, but you have this penchant for inequality that even among your friends, they're subjected to the same inequality that the ordinary African Guyanese are subjected to. There's not a level playing field even for your black friends. No level playing field for your black foes, no level playing field for your black friends. And that is what made out there in Buxton. If it were not such a serious situation, one could laugh until your belly busts and say, you get what you've been looking for. But it's a serious matter because these things infect our communities, infect our political system. And it doesn't bode well for the future. From Buxton to Hopetown, GHK, is that explain that for us. Explain Hopetown for us.
Well, I must say I have a passing acquaintance with the people of Hopetown. I have been to the Roman Catholic Church there once. My wife, prior wife, who passed, is from very close to that area. She was born and raised in Weldad. So there is Belladrum, Hopetown. There are linkages there. And every Christmas for about 30 years, of the 31 I came back 30, I would go and spend a week up there. So I have some familiarity with the neighborhood, and I have a few people that I know from there. Now, we've had this before where drivers have been targeted, and I think we've got to get past that. But we also have to be, so we have to get past that. We cannot, as incensed as people are, they're waiting. Those who kept quiet with the development in Buxton were just waiting for and raring to go on the reactions in Hopetown, meaning that when the car was targeted because of frustrations, as I'm gathering it, with the intervention of the father and how the police was sort of waving in the wind. And they were like, wait a minute, wait a minute. Are we going to be victimized by another incident of injustice here? So I that came about, but we've got to have the communities in Hopetown and Buxton have to be aware, from my perspective, that don't feed into the stereotype. Because one of the things I keep hearing is that, look, that is all what they know for do. The underpinnings, the origins are quickly forgotten, and they are overwhelmed by the deluge of voices. I'm not a participant on social media, but I can only imagine the outcries and the vileness that comes from there. So I'm saying that Hopetown is in a sense, is a continuation of Buxton in terms that Here it is that legitimate residents are concerned that the law is going to be subverted again, and they have two seriously injured people in circumstances that are still kind of hazy. Was the driver possibly intoxicated? Was he an unlicensed one? Who was this guy? Why is this double standard? Why was this selective policing appearing to be unfolding? And I think that's where the intervention came, and on an accelerated basis. And unfortunately, regrettably, it deteriorated into the into the situation involving the son and his property. Now, Hopetown, Buxton, we've got to understand these things coalesce into something. When communities, I don't care who they call their friends or who the government selects from them, when communities, black communities, Indian communities, Amerindian communities, see their leaders, the leaders that they hold in awe, the leaders that they respect, their elected leaders, are being bypassed, are being disrespected, are being abused, these things, they build, they accumulate, and they add to the simmering tensions that are under the surface. Look, we should be at peace now. We should have been at peace with the budget that came down, but we are not. We should be at peace with the glittering economic numbers that come from all the statisticians and the financial analysts and whomever else. But we are not. And we are on edge. And my sense is that if there was the right kind of leadership, that things could go a really different route. We are looking at the foreign community, the Europeans and the Americans, with the Americans spearheading, my fellow Americans spearheading, and I'm ashamed about that. What is in their interest? What is in their interest is not what is favorable to Indians and Amerindians and African Guyanese and mixed Guyanese. What is in their interest? They don't care anything about us. So we could burn cars, we could burn tires, we could block the roads, but once Exxon fetches away the oil and the slumberjays come and erect their radioactive facilities in our communities and bypass our court decisions with a feeble EPA, the American ambassador is not going to say anything. The British High Commissioner is not going to say anything. They were able to intervene tooth and nail into our national elections, and that was welcome. They've already made clear, very audibly, where they stand on local government election. But you can't say, you cannot summon the strength, the interest, and the willingness to speak about the injustices that are going on in this country, other than for the little kernel of inclusion and benefiting all Guyanese. When all Guyanese do not benefit, when the Buxton friends of the PPP government see that they are not dealing with a level playing field, they react, and they react vociferously and vigorously. And I'm choosing my words carefully here. There's that frustration. There is that recognition of inequity and unfairness, even though it might be illegitimate unfairness, dishonor among thieves. On the other hand, Hopetown is where people are sitting back and saying, we are not getting anything other than crumbs and dregs, and we are told to be contented with that. And then something like this happens from those who are getting, possibly, who are beneficiaries of government largesse. And then now they're going to twist this thing. So we're going to have two broken people in the hospital with millions of dollars in medical bills, possibly, once if they survive, and we pray that they do. And nothing is going to come out of it. And I think that's what spilled over, that built up, spilled over, and what we have. We still have to be careful. We as Guyanese have to be careful to be cognizant that the eyes of the world are upon us, and the foreigners place a premium on peace and stability, and they will give carte blanche. They will stand aside and say law and order must prevail. So there has to be a cognizance of that in terms of how things are reacted to. But again, the bottom line is that I think that the frustrations that are right below the surface are boiling over. And I'm asking myself, not in any sinister fashion, but to just ring the bell There are more communities like this. What are they seeing? What are they hearing? What are they thinking? And when circumstances come in their midst, how are they going to react? As a government, that's what I would be concerned about. Not with these farces that are intended to use, abuse, misuse, and mislead Guyanese, especially of African Guyanese and Amerindian descent, and even Indian Guyanese to a lesser extent. But the idea is to pull the wool over their eyes and say, we care, but there's no caring here. What is cared about is that a free passage will be created and given so that all the atrocities that are going on, financial atrocities, leadership atrocities, governance atrocities, can be perpetuated at will.
GHK Lall here on Politics 101 tonight. We are touching on subjects that are contemporary and that have a direct and indirect effect on the lives of ordinary, poor Guyanese people of all. And we talked about the budget, we talked about Buxton, we talked about Hopetown, and although Buxton was a fight between the KANU and Friends of the PPP, they were shooting, as they said, indiscriminately in a village. And those bullets were hitting the homes of people who had no business in their business that they were shooting up about. And this is how the community gets dragged in as they see that injustice. A friend of the PPP, but nevertheless, it's an injustice. I mean, you're chasing him and you shooting up, and you don't care who you're not going to go into Pradoville and shoot up like that. You see, so although it's not the business is not a community business, but the community gets involved and gets consumed, as Martin Pater would say, what's happening there. Go ahead.
The community gets embroiled, the community gets involved, and the community gets libeled.
That's right.
The community gets libeled for what did not originate with it, and what it is not responsible for. There's this all too human reaction. You come in my place and you shoot up my house, man. I mean, which one of us is going to sit down and say, well, let's have a resolution that is democratic? That's gone through the window. I mean, that's gone. There's a time for peacemaking and pacifying and listening. But you have endangered myself and my family and my neighbors. And unless I do so, what are you going to do next? Am I going to be gone and then you're going to tell my survivors, well, we sorry? Well, we got a saying in Guyana, sorry can't help, right?
That's right.
It's too late. So embroiled, involved, and libeled.
Libeled.
And I'm surprised, well, not surprised, given the other players in this opera, the Friends of the PPP, that this did not take a life on its own. Imagine if that were not so. Imagine if that were not so. Let's ask ourselves the other side of that question, of that equation. Oh my God, we wouldn't get a moment to talk about it. The media would have been saturated with, oh, they're gone at it again. Look at them. That's all they know to do. And somebody shoot up your house, whoever they're chasing, and you know you ain't got nothing to do with this. That has to be a problem for you. That has to be a problem for you. And I think part of that was what happened in Box. But the good thing, it's how disciplined, I said this before, and I'm going to say it again, how disciplined the PPP commentators were not to even take that and to leverage it in mainstream media.
Yeah.
They didn't. They just wanted this thing to go under the mat and never to reappear.
GHK Lall there, GHK. Ipadaji is still awaiting the resumption of that subvention. In a press conference yesterday, they revealed that they have made some contact with the Attorney General to talk about the resumption of that subvention. Thoughts on that ongoing saga?
It
Ongoing
part
this?
it part of G. Another articulation and extension of injustice in this country. Raw, rabbit. I mean, you're going to take away the subvention, millions of dollars that has been coming all along under the flimsiest of pretexts. And then that's just it. We are in charge, we are in control, and this is what it is going to be. So take that. And that's what we have with it, Pada G. That's the origins of the thing, and it has played out with a libel suit by Vincent Alexander against the vice president. And now Ipadaji has reached out to the Attorney General in a communication, which he has acknowledged. But strangely, I know the man is well, I suspect that the man is a busy man, the Honorable Attorney General. He said it was a 4-line email, but he hasn't gotten around to reading it. Maybe what he means, he hasn't gotten around to studying it. Mr. Alexander, on behalf of Ipadaji, said, we would, something to this effect, we would welcome dialogue. And I agree with that. What we have had so far is not dialogue, but diatribe. We have heard, I mean, ad infinitum about fraud. And on the other hand, we've heard about audit reports which were presented and nothing has been countered from the PPP side. I mean, if those audit reports were flawed, I'm sure we would have heard about it by now. We would have heard, well, these things are not relevant. They were not professionally done or something like that. So today's Stabrook News, in reaction to the Ipadaji letter calling for some sort of media, said the government is open, receptive to mediation. The question is, who's going to be the mediator? I mean, we are still a little ways away from there, but I think it's the way to go that there must be conversation. The problem in this country is that we are not having any conversation. Somebody wrote a pretty impressive article that I saw earlier today, about the role of the opposition. And she said, look, we're not talking about numericals here and 65 divided by 2. What we are talking about is that constitutionally, the opposition is half of the governance structure. Half of the governance structure. And I happen to agree with that interpretation and that conclusion, in that there must be that communication, there must be that collaboration, there must be that objection. They must, and so here it is what you're putting out. Here are the alternatives that we are forwarding, putting on the table as solutions. We don't have that in this country. So one by one, the African commentators, the African entities are being singled out, taken aim at, and put out. Ipadaji is one of those. I'm asking the corpse, wasn't it? And the lands, that was the last one that came out from the Honorable Minister of Labor. I mean, what are these people sitting up at night and doing? Are they thinking really of a one Guyana and of carrying this place to another level, of reaching to the opposition and say, we are going to go on record and we are going to go in public? And the opposition has to do the same thing. And I think the opposition needs to be in front of this and say, we are for engagement. We are for putting our cards on the table, and let us get to that table so we can hear each other instead of talking around each other and having our people shouting at each other. That's when we are where we are, we have an Ipadaji fallout, because the government feels that, listen, we can do anything we want. You keep saying in your intro, and I heard you again just now, when you sow the wind, when you reap, when you sow the wind from scripture, you reap the whirlwind. And we are seeing little stirrings of the whirlwind in some form or another. What happens when people get ideas that, look, we haven't had a real whirlwind yet and we need one, because that's going to be the answer, the resolution to our situation. So Ipadaji, I feel, is on the right track. I am gratified by the Attorney General's response, it seems that there is a little, from the impasse, there's a little inching forward to, look, let's get over this thing. I think only good can come from it. IPADA-G will be able to service its constituents, continue to do the kind of work that it has done very well. I see Mr. Alexander, I see Miss Olive Cannon Sampson being tireless in their efforts to bring visibility to this issue, to gain some traction for the concerns. And at the end of the day, just like the budget is the bigger tent, the more panoramic situation. IPADA-G is this subset where monies from the budget, subvention, however it's done, the mechanism, goes to IPADA-G and then is directed into worthwhile causes and communities affecting the African Guyanese community. If we really want to see, if as a government we really want to see African Guyanese be a proud, upstanding group within the demographic, within the Guyanese demographic, then we would want to fund IPADA-G not only freely, but even more effusively. And so to go the other way really shows your hand in terms of what is in it. Is it blood? Is it warmth? Or is it Arctic chill to put around your neck and make you shiver and suck the life out of you?
Thank you very much there, my brother GHK Lall. Anything that you really want to say before we go?
I think we have approached a crossroads a long time ago. I think we are on the dotted line. We're at this crossroad here now. Everything is in our hands as to how we should proceed. The wisdom is there, the awareness is there, our circumstances are there. We cannot continue in this divided role if we're going to maximize the benefits from our wealth. And I'm not talking just about oil. If we are really going to be a polity, a society, a country that can come to grips that this is not our grandmother's Guyana, our grandfather's state. This is ours, and it belongs to us. And once the government gets that in its head, and once the opposition puts that on its front burner, we are not going to be talking about the traumas of IPADA-G, the restlessness in Buxton, the frustrations in Hopetown, and whatever has happened before and what is to come. I think we have our destiny in our hands, and if we have an authenticity in our leaders on both sides, a sincerity and a commitment to honesty, we can really have a truly better Guyana.
Thank you very much, GHK Lall, for your wisdom, your thoughts, your analysis, and ultimately your activism here in trying to make sense of what has become quite a complex space in our world, a complex time, a complex moment, but one that is not beyond us. Thank you so much for coming through tonight. And to you, the audience, I left this comment by Marlene Lorimer. Guyana is a ticking bomb right now. I want to go out on that because it is a ticking bomb. And a ticking bomb can go off anytime. And that ticking bomb has been constructed by the PPP for the last 3 years, the last 2.5 years. Some of us have been victims. Many, 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 many poor people, Black people, brown people have been victims. The African Guyanese community has been targeted. The people of Mocha, the people of Linden, the vendors in Georgetown, Buxton, Hopetown, West Bobbees, number 5, or in Boston and Dartmouth, Peter Headley. Those communities have been targeted by the PPP. And the bomb is ticking, a bomb of their making. they're making. Our cries to turn back, change course have gone haywire. We said you are an emerging apartheid state instead of checking themselves. In the quarrel among friends, we are now hearing that some people who are not Africans have admitted that they're apartheid. Glimpses of apartheid, instances of apartheid. We have work to do. The bomb is ticking. The thing about bombs, when they go off, they consume all of us. We don't want to be consumed, but the bomb is ticking. Guyana is a ticking bomb right now. Marlin has left us with that wisdom. It's not too late. It's not too late. Too late shall be the cry, it seems. But it's not too late. It's not too late. We go out tonight with prayers for the people of Turkey and Syria. The hands of nature has dealt them a terrible blow. Human lives wasted, scattered. People wailing in the cold as they try to rescue their families and their countrymen and women. The human spirit can take so much battering. Let us send our solidarity because we know not when our hour will come. Guyana is a ticking bomb right now. You didn't make that ticking bomb. I didn't make that ticking bomb, but the bomb is ticking. It's a political earthquake. Guyana is a ticking bomb. We see glimpses of it every day, every day, every day. We must persevere and we have to overcome. We have to overcome.